With a habitable zone of around 300 million kilometers in diameter, Ormauk is an expansive world. Zooming out in its entirety, settlements are merely dots in the grand scheme of things. Domains within the disk spread no bigger than what could conceivably fit on a Mercury-sized planet. This is mostly due to the fact that its inhabitants have to contend with the forces of nature that have been awakened early on in the disk's creation. Creatures falling under the umbrella category of Yama roam the untamed wilds of Ormauk. Within them, they carry the will of the wilds. Should any part of the environment begin to drastically affect the natural order, these legendary creatures usually come in to reset everything and start anew. In the past, Ormauk's inhabitants fought and warred against these creatures, but the more they tried to fight it, the more the creatures seemingly adapted and evolved to overcome them. Societies who failed to realize the futility of fighting the creatures burned up in their own hubris. Those that learned to treat these creatures as some sort of natural phenomena adapted and started to integrate themselves into the natural order instead of bending it to their will. The disk-wide network, commonly referred to as the disknet, is touted as one of the most important inventions in the history of Ormauk. It started as a way for universities and governments to easily share information of any active Yama, recording their behavior and learning how to prepare their settlements should one come their way. This spread to keeping track of local flora, fauna, and ecosystems as a whole to make sure that settlements aren't triggering a response from the wilds. Over time, the general public started to contribute to this network, allowing them to set up their own data pathways and communicate with other settlements without having to venture out in the vast unknown. The disknet as it exists now has two major components that allows it to continue its service despite the millions of kilometers that separate settlements. The first is the major cable networks. Initially created by the Duendirs, these were originally abandoned networks of mines and intricate tunnels from millennia ago. Now, they're being used as a way to run massive cable networks underground. These are maintained by Ormauk's major domains since they possess the resources that allow them to continue operating and protecting these vital data networks. These major cable networks can only stretch so far from the major domains, and that's where the second component of the disknet comes in. In between the major domains are smaller communities or cities that have network relay stations. These buildings will vary from place to place. Most communities treat them as a central hub for information, public services, and some are even treated as temples. These are self-sufficient buildings that handle data transmission to the next city until it reaches its intended destination. They provide a way for these otherwise isolated communities to be connected to the wider disknet, and major domains rely on the vast network of relay stations to get vital data across millions of kilometers of untamed wilds. A colorful variety of servers, services, and software are the building blocks of this information highway. No one group controls significant chunks of the disknet, and ownership of this library is culturally frowned upon by Ormauk's inhabitants. Consequently, because the disknet has to accommodate all different kinds of technologies, its data transfer is not as fast as most people would like it to be. In perfect conditions and routing, it can take about 50 minutes for data to circumnavigate the 300 million kilometer diameter of Ormauk's habitable zone. But conditions are nowhere near perfect. Old and new technologies have to work together. Data has to be translated before transmission. Wires will vary, and wireless is not the most reliable over long distances. Because of the sheer vastness of Ormauk, disknet culture varies wildly depending on which major domain you're geographically closer to. Countless stories of differing qualities are shared within the disknet, and it has certainly evolved from its initial usage. More popular types of sites are ones that allow people to share photos, videos, and little snippets of their slice of Ormauk. The disk-wide network has connected countless lives together with a click of a button. So, as I mentioned in the first video, I'm going to pick a place somewhere in Ormauk and focus on that location to showcase everything there is to see in that little dot of the disk. For the next few weeks, I'm going to be drawing things from the city of Yatua. This illustration is supposed to be one of the network relay stations in that city. I've mentioned this earlier, but one of the main ideas I had for these buildings is that they're supposed to be self-sustaining, continuing the solarpunk vibes I mentioned in the last video. These buildings should harness the energy of their surroundings and sustain itself energy-wise. So in one of the thumbnails, I had an idea for a light tower kind of building with buoy things on the water that would generate energy through the waves. Apparently that's actually already a real thing, or something that's being researched for practical and commercial use. Another iteration of the station was a flatland kind of environment. If you've ever lived in flatlands or prairies kinds of areas, you'll know what I mean when I say it gets really windy in these environments. Plus, the lack of canopies means that sunlight is always available, barring cloudy days. Another idea I had for the station was a more urbanized relay station. I learned about these facade buildings within cities which contain electrical substations. This kind of gave me an idea for a more urban version of the relay station with streetlights, roads, and railings surrounding it. These kinds of relay stations wouldn't need to be self-sustaining because I imagine there would already be a developed energy grid. Finally, I also did a thumbnail sketch for a station that is situated on top of sheer cliff faces. This one I didn't fully explore, but I'd imagine it would have a lot of wind energy related tech like windmills and airborne wind turbines. I really liked all these ideas, and I'll probably do a full illustration for some of them later down the line. I ultimately landed on the dome structure on the grasslands because I wanted to show Yatua as a more rural kind of area. The vast greeneries in the background was really appealing to me. Despite this, I did throw in some aspects of the other thumbnail sketches into this dome illustration. The railings from the urban sketch made it in here, but the lack of more urban structures like streetlights and people in general gives it a more laid-back, more isolated feel that I think rural buildings tend to have. I originally wanted to put some citizens in there, but I wanted to focus more on the building itself instead of the characters, and I felt like the characters would draw too much attention away from the building itself. Plus, I haven't fully explored the visual identity of the people living in Yatua, so I held off on them entirely. Although I am going to be showing you guys some of the character concepts I had in the next week's video, so keep an eye out for that. To sum up, these network relay stations are essentially glorified internet service providers within the setting. They aid in the free sharing of knowledge and data across the disk. I really like how this illustration turned out. I wanted to incorporate a lot of Moebius in the line work and Ghibli in the color. Although I can't fully convince myself that I achieved what I originally had in mind, I think what I ended up with here is pretty close to it. I hope you guys enjoyed this introduction into the disk-wide network and the illustration itself. Hope to see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.